Hello folks, this is Gabo reporting from Sopron. Today I want to talk about a little bit of a different thing than myself, because I've been talking a lot about myself and I now want to be a bit more private. Of course, what I want is now in a bit of a tug of war, because sometimes I want this, sometimes I want that, and in this period, in this last 1.5 years, I think, yeah, maybe even more, is there's was just this whirlwind in my system that's like I want a lot of new things, and then I'm back to the old, new things back to the old, and I guess this tug of war is going to continue on for a while. But yeah, like, long story short, I am now on a spiritual way. I'm a highly sensitive person, and I am dedicating myself to what I feel is right. And that's pretty much it. I'm cutting ties with the old world and I'm building new ties with the new world. And I want to go step by step, just to make sure, or at least less likely, that I am going insane, right? Once I let a lot of things go, like I realized that I need to stop, because otherwise it's just too much, too much. So slowly but surely, that's the way. So what is it that I want to talk about once I spoke so much about what I don't want to talk about? Well, I want to talk about the Russo-Ukrainian war, because it's been 1 year. Yeah, so last year, I think exactly a week ago, because I'm recording this on the 3rd of March, it was the first anniversary of the Russo-Ukrainian war, or special military operation, as Russia calls it. Now, what is the importance of the Russo-Ukrainian war? Well, the importance is that this war actually has an impact on our everyday life. So we need to talk about this. It's not a football game. It's not life of a celebrity that doesn't fucking matter, but maybe for some reason people like to talk about those things. In my opinion, these are the things that we need to talk about, and of course it can stir up controversy, and it can be a ground for conflicts with other people. So I understand why everybody wants to, well, maybe not everybody, but many people want to talk about neutral things, but I still think that these are the things that we need to talk about. And why? Because then the mainstream media, people that don't want good for us, will control the narrative, and we are not going to, and it's going to be easy for them because we don't have our own opinions, right? Other than that, it's really good to think it over. What is it that we are going, or where is it that we are going? What is it that we are doing with our lives, with our decisions? Because otherwise we can succumb to hysteria. And this hysteria, when we are making a decision based on hysteria, is just a shitty decision, most probably. So it's important to calm down and to speak whatever is on my mind, to speak our truths, I think, even if we are wrong, because if we are wrong but never speak, never talk to other people, we will never be corrected, and we will never really figure out what is really going on. So these are my ideas, and this is why I want to make an example by talking about something that is actually important. So what is it? What is it that we need to talk about when we talk about the Russo-Ukrainian war? Well, first thing I think is the politics. That there are three parties involved, and the most important parties are actually the United States and Russia. It might be, again, a controversial statement, but I think that the third well, partner, that's not really like, the victim is Ukraine, is the least important actor in the story, really. That because how I see it is that the Russo-Ukrainian war is a classic proxy war. What does it mean? That there are two big players. In the Cold War, it was the Soviet Union and Russia. I almost said Russia, and the United States, and they were fighting it out, not directly between each other, because they had nuclear weapons, so there was a chance of mutual assured destruction, mad. So they just fought it out on different fields, like, for example, Iraq-Iran war, and a lot of other examples. Afghanistan, not the US Afghanistan, but the Soviet Union Afghanistan in the 80s. So these were the wars that were actually classic proxy wars, and these wars are coming back with the war in Ukraine. I don't want this video to be really long, so I don't want to go into the causes of the war, but let's just say that I don't believe in pointing a finger of the responsible actor in a conflict. If somebody is in a conflict, then they all have some level of responsibility for it. So in my eyes, US, Russia, and Ukraine, they all have responsibilities. I think the debate should be about, like how much they have. But, in general, they all have a responsibility for this conflict to happen. And I don't want to get into this in more detail because there's just a lot to cover. And the more I am saying that, oh my God, I'm not going to talk about this because it takes a lot of time, it just takes much more time because I repeat it too much. You get it? It takes a lot of time still. I'm an asshole sometimes. Anyway, I think this is the basic things in politics to understand, so that once everybody takes some sort of responsibility, then that's when we can have a conversation. Like if everybody is just throwing responsibility around as if it was hot iron, then yeah, we are just going to have conflicts without solution. Another thing is that is important in this conflict, of course, is the tactics and strategy, the strategic level of the war. Now, another controversial statement, another controversial statement is that the war in this conflict is actually not that important. I think on a strategic level, what is much more important is the economic war. So that, meaning that if you break the economy of your enemy, then the enemy is not going to be able to wage war against you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I think that this notion of the Western media that is trying to sell the idea that Russia has somehow got off guard by the Ukrainian resistance is just not true. Like, of course, that they wanted to finish the war. Now I believe this. Previously I didn't, but now I do believe that Russia tried to finish the war within a week or two, but they couldn't. And I do think that they had a plan B. It took time to implement it, but they did implement it. And when it takes, when we see that, is that because their economy is not just that it's still standing, Russia's economy, but it's also thriving when it comes to the revenues that Russia is getting, because it's an all-time high. So the sanctions that the West wanted to break Russia with, they are just not working. They are working in a way that is really horrible for the West, because it's breaking Europe. It's breaking Europe slowly but surely. Now we don't see huge fractions at the moment because the winter was really, really mild. So that was a huge, big fortune. I mean, a good fortune for Europe, that they didn't have to spend a fortune on gas and oil to compensate for a cold winter, because it's getting more and more expensive. So if you live in Europe, then you know. And most of European people, I guess, still think that it's worth the price, because then we can defeat Russia. But I don't think so. I don't really think so, because it's not a surefire way that we can actually defeat Russia, or that Ukraine can defeat Russia. I'm going to talk about the tactics, and what I'm saying is that I'm pretty sure that Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. And even if they do, continuing with the sanctions is just going to break Europe in the long run, the European Union. We already see fractions in politics, so that countries fighting it out between each other, like for example, Italy and Germany and France, small countries between each other. There was the Slovakian government that collapsed. Moldova is not part of the European Union, but their government also collapsed, and mainly or partially because they supported the economic policies of the European Union, which was equaling to an economic suicide, because they were crazily dependent on Russia's oil and Russia's economy. So there is that. We need to be really careful about what is it that we are going to go in, and what is it that is worse for us in this war against Russia, the economic war against Russia, because whole Europe and the West of the world is at war economically against Russia. And we need to tone it down, I think, if we want to preserve some sort of European unity. And when it comes to the military level, on the ground, it looks quite stable, with the exception of Bakhmut, where Russia is winning currently. It's called the Bakhmut meat grinder for a reason, because there's the way I see it is that there are Ukrainian troops sent in en masse, and they are liquidated by the Wagner PMC. And of course, Wagner takes those heavy losses too, but I don't really believe this notion or this claim that the Western media says that there are just huge losses on the Ukrainian side and minimal losses on huge losses on the Russian side and minimal losses on the Ukrainian side, just because they are the defenders. We need to remember that Wagner PMC is slowly but surely specializing in urban warfare, whereas the Ukrainian troops are, well, not all of them, but a lot of the times sent in fresh and with not as much training as the Wagner units. So they are wiped out, in my opinion, on a higher scale than the Wagner private military. What is C? Cooperative? Corporation? The Wagner PMC, yeah. So all in all, Bakhmut looks really, really bad, and we all know, I think, by now that it's about to fall. If it's going to be 1 day or 1 week, doesn't really matter. If a miracle happens, then it's not going to happen, but it's almost a certainty that Bakhmut is going to fall. On the other fronts, there is a small push of the Russian forces, because at one point they could stop the Ukrainian offensive, and I am not sure that the promise of the further Ukrainian offensives are feasible, because now Russia threw in many more boots, like there are more boots in the ground, fresh troops engaging the Ukrainian forces, at least 300,000 more than it used to be. But who knows what the real number is, because there are also volunteer units, so it can be the Russian forces can be anywhere between 400,000 to 700,000, counting in Wagner and also the units of the Donbas republics, right? The Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. So yeah, with that many troops on the ground, I don't think it's possible anymore for Ukraine to have successful offensives, because the offensives previously, they were working in this way, that there were huge gaps in the Russian line, right? Because they just didn't have enough troops to fill the gaps, so that the deep reconnaissance units of Ukraine, NATO-trained reconnaissance units, they could penetrate deep and hold the line until reinforcements arrived, and then they went further. So with these tactics, the Russian lines just collapsed in Kharkiv, in the Kharkiv Oblast, Kharkiv region, and they could occupy or, retake almost all the territories in the Kharkiv Oblast, and also intrude in Lugansk Oblast. And of course, in Kherson, they did the same. There was a significant breakthrough, and then the Russian forces, the Russian military had to make the decision to leave Kherson. Well, not the whole oblast, but the city that is on the western back of the Dnipro River. So now the situation, the strategic and the tactical situation, I think looks pretty dire for Ukraine. We also have to remember that there are more and more people leaving the Ukraine, and there is also more and more damage to Ukraine. So I think the earlier this war stops, the better would be for Ukraine. And I'm also going, then again, I'm going to say controversial remarks. And what I think is that this is really a classic example of what the West, NATO, mainly the United States, does with a country. Now they basically elect their own government. They make sure that their own government is in place. They are controlling the government in a certain country, or if they can't control the government, they invade or bomb the country until they are going to get a government that they like. And once they get this government that they like, they exploit the country economically. And if they can't do that, they just leave and don't give a fuck about the country anymore. Let's say, for example, Afghanistan, or Iraq, or Libya, or Syria, if there were no Russian forces there. What they did, invade, bomb the country, leave it, and the country falls apart, right? There are failed states everywhere where the US threats. And unless some sort of miracle happens, this is going to happen in Ukraine as well, especially if there are not going to be any people left in the country. So when I look at the political, tactical, strategic situation of Ukraine, it's really bad. It's really fucking bad. And I understand the cheerleading coming from many countries for Ukraine, because, well, they don't like Ukraine, they hate Russia. And I think that's That's a really important statement, another controversial one, to say that in this conflict, Ukraine doesn't really have friends. The Western countries are really happy for Ukraine to fight their war against Russia, that they don't really have the willingness to fight. But once this war is over, Ukraine is going to be done. If there's going to be a country again, is going to take decades to make it happen. Or can they, this like that's the main question that I have, like, can they even convince the people that left Ukraine to return? Because by this point, I think we are closer to 10 million than we are closer to 5 million that left Ukraine. And if they cannot get the territories back that Russia has taken, then it's even less. So we are talking about a country of 40 million people going down to 30, 25 million, many of which are old people. So it's going to be even more diminishing with as the time passes. Realistically, Ukraine is in a really, really bad situation. Ukraine is fucked. And I just hope, I don't believe in it, but I do hope that all the parties around this war, they realize that somehow this situation can be solved without actually shooting at each other. It's not really good for anyone, especially not for Ukraine or the European Union. And I just hope that this conflict will end in a way that is somehow okay for all the parties. Yeah, I'm saying these words, but I can't really take them seriously. Period. So this was the political, economic, strategic, tactical analysis, a really short one of the war. And I might want to take or record another video about going deeper. So what are the actual implications of the war on a deeper level? Yeah, so that what is the significance, historical significance, and what is the spiritual significance of this war and the relations between the peoples that are waging this war. I'm not promising that I'm going to do this video, but I'm for now thinking about it. What I promise is that after this, I'm going to make the remaining 5 videos about all the things that interest me and I find important to talk about. So guys, make your own mind up, get informed, and talk about the important things. Gabriel's out. Ciao, ciao.